I never wanted to live in an HOA neighborhood. The very concept made my skin crawl, paying strangers for the privilege of telling me what I could do with my own property. But when my wife Sarah landed her dream job at the regional hospital, we needed to relocate quickly, and Oakwood Estates was the only decent option in our price range within reasonable commuting distance. It's not that bad, Sarah assured me as we signed the closing papers. The neighborhood is gorgeous, the schools are excellent, and the HOA fees cover the community pool and gym. Our realtor, Cindy, nodded enthusiastically. Oakwood has one of the most well-managed HOAs in the county. Property values have increased steadily for the past decade. From the outside, Oakwood Estates was picture perfect, manicured lawns, coordinated house colors, and not a basketball hoop or kiddie pool in sight. The homes weren't identical. They ranged from modest three-bedroom ranches to sprawling mini mansions, but there was a careful uniformity that spoke of rules and regulations. What neither mentioned was that Oakwood Estates was effectively ruled by one person, Karen Worthington, a 50-something widow whose late husband had left her with enough money to renovate her house every other year and enough free time to make everyone else's life a living hell. I first encountered Karen 3 days after we moved in. I was setting up a basketball hoop for my 12-year-old son, Jake, when a silver Mercedes SUV screeched to a halt in front of our driveway. "Excuse me." The window rolled down to reveal a woman with an immaculate blonde bob and sunglasses worth more than my first car. "That basketball hoop is against HOA regulations." I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead. I checked the guidelines before installing it. Portable basketball hoops are allowed as long as they're stored in the garage when not in use. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Worthington, HOA president. And yes, portable hoops are allowed, but that model exceeds the height restrictions by approximately 4 inches. 4 inches? You can't be serious. Rules are rules. I'll expect it to be removed by tomorrow, or you'll receive a formal violation notice." She drove off before I could respond. That night, I dug through the 78-page HOA covenant and found nothing about basketball hoop height restrictions. But it was just a basketball hoop, and we were new to the neighborhood. I didn't want to start trouble. I had no idea I had just encountered the first raindrop of a hurricane that would consume the next year of my life. The official violation notice appeared in our mailbox exactly 1 week after we moved in. Inside a crisp white envelope with the Oakwood Estates logo was a form letter listing our offense: non-conforming recreational equipment visible from street. A $50 fine was assessed, payable within 7 days. I immediately called the HOA office number listed on the letter. "Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. This is Karen." Of course it was. "Hi, Karen. This is Daniel Mitchell from 1478 Oakwood Drive. I received a violation notice about my son's basketball hoop, but I've reviewed the covenant and can't find any height restrictions for portable equipment. Section 12, paragraph 4, subsection B clearly states that all recreational equipment must conform to neighborhood aesthetic standards as determined by the Architectural Review Committee." Karen replied without hesitation. Could I see the specific standards? They weren't included in our closing documents. Those standards are reviewed quarterly and available upon request at the HOA office during business hours, which are Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Convenient hours for a neighborhood where most residents worked weekdays. I worked during those hours. Could you email me the standards? We don't provide covenant documents electronically for security reasons. I took a deep breath. "Karen, I want to comply with the rules, but I need to know what they are first." "Well, in this specific case, portable basketball hoops cannot exceed 6 feet in height when in use." 6 feet? That's barely usable for a child, let alone an adult. If you want a regulation height basketball hoop, you should have purchased a home with a backyard court. Now, will you be paying the fine by check or credit card? I didn't want to create problems so early in our residence, so I reluctantly paid the fine and bought a shorter basketball hoop. Jake was disappointed, but I promised we'd find a public park where he could practice properly. 2 weeks later, another violation notice arrived: improper garden hose storage, hose visible from street. Another $50 fine. This time, I went to the HOA office during the specified hours. Karen seemed surprised to see me. The garden hose was coiled neatly beside the spigot. I explained. Where exactly should it be stored? Garden hoses must be stored in approved hose containers or inside the garage when not in active use, she said, sliding a glossy brochure across the desk. Oakwood Estates partners with Garden Elegance for approved hose containers. They offer a 10% discount to our residents. The brochure showcased decorative containers ranging from $79 to $129 for a garden hose holder. Is this partnership beneficial to the HOA financially? I asked innocently. Karen's smile tightened. All vendor relationships are disclosed in the annual financial report. Will you be paying your fine today, or would you prefer to mail a check? I paid the fine and bought the cheapest approved hose container. But as I left the office, something caught my eye. A framed photo on the wall showing Karen receiving an award from Garden Elegance, Vendor Partner of the Year. I was starting to understand how Oakwood Estates really operated. Within our first month at Oakwood Estates, we received violation notices for a garden hose visible from the street, despite the new container. My son's bike left on the front porch for 2 hours. Grass that was allegedly 0.25 inches above regulation height. A bird feeder that was non-conforming. Christmas lights still up on January 3rd. We had moved in on December 30th. Each notice came with a $50 fine, and each fine came with a personal visit from Karen, who seemed to take perverse pleasure in explaining exactly how we had failed to maintain Oakwood standards. When I tried to dispute the Christmas light violation, Karen casually mentioned that she lived directly across from the neighborhood's entrance and kept meticulous notes of all potential covenant violations to protect everyone's property values. I soon discovered we weren't the only targets. Our neighbor to the left, an elderly man named Frank, who had lived in Oakwood for 20 years, had been fined repeatedly for his unsightly rose bushes. The young couple to our right, the Johnsons, received weekly notices about their toddlers' toys being visible in their backyard. Don't take it personally, Frank told me over the fence one evening. Karen goes after all newcomers. She thinks it establishes dominance. How is she still in charge if everyone hates her? I asked. Frank chuckled. Most people don't attend the HOA meetings, and the few who do are her friends. She's been president for 7 years running. Plus, her late husband was one of the original developers, so she acts like she owns the place. The Johnsons stopped by one weekend while I was mowing my lawn, precisely to the regulation 2.75 inches. We got another fine for Emma's swing set, Maria Johnson said, visibly frustrated. It's in our backyard behind a fence. Karen claims it's visible from the common area walking path and therefore subject to front yard restrictions. That's ridiculous, I replied. The covenant clearly distinguishes between front and backyard regulations. We know, but fighting it means taking time off work for the appeals meeting, which is only held on Wednesday mornings. It's cheaper to just pay the fine. I realized this was by design. Make compliance more convenient than resistance. The final straw came when Jake was playing basketball with his new shorter hoop. Karen drove by, stopped, and took photos. The next day, we received a violation notice for excessive noise from recreational activities after 7 p.m. The fine was $100. This is absurd, I told Sarah that night. He was playing at 6:30, and since when is a kid playing basketball excessive noise? Sarah, who had been patient with the mounting HOA issues, finally shared my outrage. This has to stop. She's targeting our son now. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, hoping to better understand how this organization operated. As I walked into the community center, Karen's eyes narrowed at the sight of me, but she quickly recovered, flashing that artificial smile. Welcome. So glad you could join us. We don't often see new faces at these meetings. I soon understood why. The meeting was 3 hours of mind-numbing discussions about paint color approvals and landscape vendor bids, with Karen controlling every conversation. When a brave soul questioned the increasing frequency of violation notices, Karen smoothly changed the subject, suggesting they form a committee to study the issue, a committee she would chair naturally. I left feeling frustrated and powerless. But that night, as I paid another $150 in fines, something in me snapped. I had always considered myself a reasonable, law-abiding person. But if Karen wanted to play games, I could play too. I just needed to understand the rule book better than she did. The situation reached a breaking point on a Friday afternoon in April. Jake had invited 3 friends over after school to play video games and shoot some hoops. I'd made sure the basketball hoop was properly positioned and had even set up a timer to remind the boys to finish playing by 6:30 p.m., a full 30 minutes before Karen's arbitrary noise curfew. At 4:15 p.m., a tow truck pulled into our driveway. I rushed outside to find Karen standing next to it, arms crossed. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Your vehicle is in violation of covenant restrictions," she said coolly. Section 8, paragraph 12. No recreational vehicles may be parked in driveways or visible from the street. I looked at my normal 4-door sedan in confusion. "What recreational vehicle?" She pointed to the roof. "That, Mr. Mitchell, is a kayak rack. Kayaks are recreational vehicles. The covenant is clear." Indeed, my car had a roof rack that I sometimes used for my kayak, though there was no kayak on it today. This is ridiculous. It's an empty roof rack on a normal car. The covenant doesn't distinguish between the recreational vehicle and its transportation apparatus. Now you can either move your vehicle to your garage immediately, or it will be towed at your expense. The tow truck operator looked uncomfortable. "Lady, it's just a roof rack." "Do your job or I'll report you to your supervisor," Karen snapped. "Oakwood Estates has a contract with your company." "Karen," I said, trying to remain calm. "The kids are watching. Can we discuss this reasonably?" "Rules are rules," she replied, the same phrase she used the day we met. "You have 2 minutes to move your car or it's being towed." I moved my car into the garage, much to the confusion of Jake and his friends watching from the window. As Karen and the tow truck left, I heard one of the boys say, "Your neighborhood is weird, Jake." That night, while Sarah and I were discussing the incident, a certified letter arrived by special courier. The HOA board was initiating foreclosure proceedings on our home for repeated and willful covenant violations. "They can't do this," Sarah said, her face pale. "We've paid every ridiculous fine." But according to the letter, we had missed a $25 administrative fee attached to our second garden hose violation, a fee never mentioned in the original notice. With late penalties, it had ballooned to $175, and under Florida law, the HOA could indeed foreclose for unpaid assessments. "This is beyond harassment," I said, my hands shaking with anger. "She's trying to take our home because she doesn't like us." I called Frank, who confirmed my fears. They did this to a family on Maple Street last year. Single mom with 3 kids. She fought it, but legal fees drained her savings. Eventually sold at a loss and moved. "This is insane. There has to be a way to fight back." "Better be careful," Frank warned. "Karen's brother-in-law is a judge in county court. Her cousin runs the biggest real estate firm in town. She's connected." Sarah took my hand. "What are we going to do?" I looked at the wall where I'd been pinning every violation notice, every receipt, every piece of correspondence from the HOA. I'm going to make her regret the day she decided to mess with our family. The breaking point wasn't just about a roof rack or an administrative fee. It was the realization that Karen wasn't simply an overzealous HOA president. She was a bully using the covenant as a weapon, targeting families who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. And she picked the wrong family this time. I began my counteroffensive with research. I requested copies of all HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and architectural review decisions for the past 5 years. Rights guaranteed to me as a homeowner under state law. Karen tried to stonewall me, claiming such extensive records would burden the volunteer board. I politely reminded her that state law required the HOA to provide these documents within 10 business days, and that I was happy to quote the specific statute if needed. The documents arrived on day 10, thousands of pages dropped off by a clearly annoyed Karen. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said with a tight smile. Meanwhile, I paid the $175 administrative fee under protest, documenting every communication and keeping copies of all checks and receipts. It took weeks of late nights, but what I found in the documents was illuminating. The FOA had been selectively enforcing rules, with Karen's circle of friends receiving informal warnings, while others received immediate fines. More concerning, the financial records showed questionable spending. Landscaping contracts awarded to Karen's cousin's company at above market rates, emergency repairs to common areas near Karen's home, and a suspicious pattern of HOA funds being used for board training retreats at luxury resorts. I also discovered that the current board had never properly filed amendments to the covenant. The version they were enforcing contained dozens of rules that had never been approved by the required 75% of homeowners. Armed with this information, I reached out to other frustrated residents. Frank introduced me to disgruntled homeowners. Maria Johnson, whose request to install solar panels had been denied 3 times despite state laws supporting renewable energy. David Chin, a lawyer who had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. And the Paddles, who had been battling the HOA over their son's medical accommodation request for a wheelchair ramp. "We've all wanted to do something," Maria explained during our covert meeting in Frank's garage. "But Karen has connections with the property management company, the landscapers, even some people at City Hall. Plus, she has the time and money to make our lives miserable if we challenge her." "What she doesn't have," I said, showing them my organized findings, "is respect for the actual rules. She's been using the HOA as her personal fiefdom, and I think there's enough here to make a case for removing the board." David examined my notes. "This is impressive, but removing an entrenched board is difficult. We'd need a majority vote from all homeowners, and most people don't care enough to show up." "Then we make them care," I replied. Our first move was to create a private Facebook group called Oakwood Estates Community Forum, innocuous enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but a channel to share information outside of Karen's controlled HOA communications. Next, I contacted a journalist at the local newspaper who specialized in consumer issues. With evidence of financial improprieties and selective enforcement, she began investigating the Oakwood Estates FOA, interviewing residents and researching similar cases in other communities. The most brilliant stroke came from David, who discovered that Karen had never properly registered the HOA as a corporate entity with the state after the original developer transitioned control to the homeowners. This meant that technically, the HOA couldn't legally enforce the covenant or collect fines, and hadn't been able to for the past 5 years. Armed with this information, we sent a formal legal notice to the entire board and the property management company, demanding an immediate halt to all enforcement actions and a full refund of all fines collected during the period of improper registration. Karen's response was swift. She called an emergency board meeting, declared our legal notice misinformation, and announced special assessments to cover unexpected legal expenses, $500 per household, due immediately. But we were prepared. At the emergency meeting, David stood up and calmly explained the legal situation to the shocked homeowners in attendance. He projected corporate registration requirements onto a screen, showing the lapsed status of the Oakwood Estates HOA. What this means, he concluded, is that not only are the fines invalid, but the board has been operating without proper authority, potentially exposing individual board members to personal liability. The room erupted in chaos. Board members whispered urgently to each other. Homeowners demanded answers. And Karen, for the first time since I'd met her, looked genuinely afraid. The emergency meeting ended with Karen hastily calling for a brief recess, which turned into a complete adjournment when she and the other board members retreated to a private room and refused to return. The next day, every Oakwood resident received a letter, not from Karen, but from the HOA's attorney. It acknowledged administrative oversights in the HOA's corporate registration, but insisted this was a minor technical issue that would be remedied immediately. The letter also stated that all current covenant enforcements would continue, and anyone refusing to pay fines would face legal action. It was a bluff, and we knew it. Our Facebook group exploded with activity as residents shared their own stories of Karen's selective enforcement and petty tyranny. The local newspaper published its investigation under the headline, Neighborhood Nightmare: When HOAs Go Too Far, featuring interviews with multiple Oakwood families and expert analysis of the legal irregularities. For the first time, Karen was on the defensive. She tried to schedule one-on-one meetings with influential homeowners, offering to review their past violations in exchange for support. She sent a private letter to our group, suggesting she would consider resignation if we withdrew our legal challenges and signed non-disclosure agreements. We declined. Then came the defections. 2 board members, clearly worried about their personal liability, resigned. Another approached us privately, offering internal documents in exchange for being excluded from any potential lawsuits. The property management company, sensing a losing battle, informed the HOA they would be terminating their contract at the earliest opportunity. Karen, increasingly isolated, made a critical error. She authorized the use of HOA reserve funds, money legally restricted for major repairs and emergencies, to pay for her growing legal expenses. When the HOA treasurer refused to sign the checks, Karen forged his signature. We might never have discovered this if the treasurer hadn't approached David in a grocery store parking lot, visibly shaken, with copies of the forged checks. "I can't be part of this anymore," he said, handing over an envelope. "She's crossed a line." With evidence of financial fraud, we contacted the district attorney's office. Within a week, investigators were reviewing the HOA's financial records and interviewing board members. Karen made one last desperate move. She called an informational meeting at her home for select residents, mostly her supporters and those who hadn't engaged in the controversy. According to attendees who later shared recordings with us, she characterized our group as radical elements trying to destroy property values and eliminate necessary standards. She proposed a special election to replace the resigned board members with her hand-picked candidates. But it was too late. The newspaper published a follow-up story about the forgery allegations. The district attorney's office confirmed an active investigation, and the state's HOA Oversight Division had opened an inquiry into the improper corporate registration. The final blow to Karen's regime came from an unexpected source. The insurance company that provided liability coverage for the HOA board sent a letter disclaiming coverage for any actions taken during the period of improper registration, leaving board members personally exposed to lawsuits. Within days, every remaining board member except Karen resigned. With no quorum, the board could not conduct business, approve expenses, or enforce covenants. Karen Worthington's empire had effectively collapsed. A temporary administrator appointed by the court called for a special election to form a new HOA board. Unlike previous elections held on weekday mornings with minimal notice, this one was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon with multiple advance reminders sent to every household. The turnout was unprecedented. Over 80% of Oakwood's households were represented. Our coalition put forward a slate of candidates including David, Maria, and Frank, while Karen hastily assembled her own slate of loyal supporters. In a last-ditch effort to maintain control, Karen took the podium before voting began. For 7 years, I have dedicated my life to maintaining Oakwood Estates' reputation as one of the most desirable communities in this county. She began, her voice quavering slightly. Property values have increased by 32% under my leadership. Our landscaping has won regional awards. Our streets are safe and clean. She paused, scanning the room. Yes, I have enforced the covenants strictly. Yes, I have been uncompromising in maintaining standards. But everything I've done has been for the benefit of this community, a community my late husband helped build from nothing. Her voice hardened. If you elect these insurgents, everything we've worked for will be at risk. They want to relax the standards, allow eyesores and nuisances, turn Oakwood into just another declining subdivision where anything goes. It might have been effective once, this appeal to property values and exclusivity, but the room had changed. The assembled homeowners had read the financial records, seen the evidence of selective enforcement, heard from their neighbors about the petty tyranny they'd endured. When David took the podium in response, his approach was measured. "No one here disputes that aesthetic standards have value," he said. "What we dispute is the selective enforcement of those standards, the financial improprieties, and the use of the HOA as a personal vendetta machine." He projected a simple chart showing violation notices by street, with Karen's street receiving virtually none despite visible infractions. Another slide showed HOA expenditures concentrated around properties owned by board members and their friends. An HOA should be transparent, fair, and focused on actual community needs, not on intimidating residents or enriching insiders. He concluded, "The choice today isn't between standards and chaos. It's between abuse and accountability." The vote wasn't even close. Our entire slate won by margins of at least 3-1. Karen, watching from the back of the room as the results were announced, didn't wait for the final count. She grabbed her designer purse and stalked out, alone. But our victory was immediately complicated by the discovery that the HOA's finances were in even worse shape than we'd realized. Beyond the misappropriated funds, Karen had depleted reserves for legal expenses and failed to collect assessments from her friends and allies for years. The accounts were nearly empty, with significant bills outstanding. Then, as we were literally examining the financial records in the HOA office the day after the election, we received word that Karen had been arrested at her home for financial fraud related to the forged checks. The district attorney, recognizing the public interest in the case, had moved quickly once the evidence was verified. The image of Karen Worthington, HOA president, self-declared community protector, and neighborhood tyrant, being escorted from her immaculately landscaped home in handcuffs made the front page of the local newspaper. The headline simply read, "House of Cards." Karen's arrest created a momentary power vacuum in Oakwood Estates. Some homeowners, accustomed to rigid enforcement, began to test boundaries, parking RVs in driveways, installing unapproved fixtures, neglecting lawn maintenance. Others feared a collapse in property values if the community standards disappeared entirely. Our new board faced the challenge of rebuilding an HOA that protected property values without becoming oppressive, that maintained standards without weaponizing them. We immediately implemented several reforms: a complete rewrite of the covenant, eliminating vague language that allowed selective interpretation; a transparent violation process with clear appeal procedures and graduated warnings before fines; open board meetings held in evenings and weekends to allow maximum participation; detailed monthly financial reports available to all homeowners; term limits for board members. We also had to address the financial crisis. Rather than imposing special assessments on already resentful homeowners, we negotiated payment plans with vendors, terminated excessive contracts, and pursued recovery of misappropriated funds. Karen's legal troubles mounted. Beyond the forgery charges, forensic accountants discovered she had been skimming HOA funds for personal expenses for years, disguising them as community improvements or administrative costs. As part of a plea agreement to avoid jail time, she agreed to pay full restitution, nearly $147,000, and sell her home in Oakwood Estates. The day she moved out, there was no crowd gathered to watch, no celebration or gloating. Most residents simply felt relief that the dark cloud over the community had finally lifted. 6 months later, Oakwood Estates held a community festival in the Central Park, the first in nearly a decade, as Karen had eliminated such frivolous expenses years ago. Families gathered for food, games, and music. Children played freely on the grass without fear of violation notices. A sense of genuine community had begun to emerge. As Jake played basketball with neighborhood friends on a newly installed community court, regulation height, of course, Frank joined me with a cold drink. "Remember your first week here?" he asked with a chuckle. "When she cited you for that basketball hoop?" "Hard to forget," I replied, "though sometimes it feels like a bad dream now." You know what the irony is? Karen was right about one thing: property values are important. But she never understood that the real value of a neighborhood isn't just in how it looks. It's in how it feels to live here. I nodded, watching residents chatting and laughing together. "You think she learned anything from all this?" Frank shrugged. "People like Karen rarely do. Last I heard, she bought a condo in another HOA community across town. probably terrorizing a new neighborhood as we speak. Well, they have my sympathies, I said, and my phone number if they need advice. The story of Karen Worthington and the Oakwood Estates OA became something of a local legend, occasionally referenced in news stories about homeowners' rights or community governance. The district attorney even used it as a case study in a seminar about HOA fraud detection. As for our family, we had considered moving after the ordeal, but decided to stay. Oakwood Estates wasn't perfect. No community is, but it had become something it hadn't been under Karen's reign. A neighborhood of homes rather than houses, of neighbors rather than adversaries. The basketball hoop that started it all still stands in our driveway. Jake, now in high school, uses it less often, but neighborhood kids gather there regularly for impromptu games. We keep it stored in the garage when not in use, not because of HOA rules, but because it's the considerate thing to do. Sometimes, standing up to a Karen with money who thinks she owns the world isn't just about winning a battle. It's about rebuilding a community worth fighting for. The end.